In a small village surrounded by vast green lands lived a humble farmer named John. His calloused hands and sun-marked face told the story of a life dedicated to cultivating the land. There was no one in the region who didn't know the fruits of his labor, abundant harvests that filled the barns with life and brought bread to many tables. His fields were like a golden sea under the blue sky, and in every grain harvested was the sweat of a man. In a small village surrounded by vast green lands lived a humble farmer named John. His calloused hands and sun-marked face told the story of a life dedicated to cultivating the land. There was no one in the region who didn't know the fruits of his labor, abundant harvests that filled the barns with life and brought bread to many tables. His fields were like a golden sea under the blue sky, and in every grain harvested was the sweat of a man who found dignity in daily toil. But the winds of fortune are fickle, as those who depend on the land for survival well know. An unrelenting winter, unlike anything previously seen in the region, arrived without warning. The sky, once generous with its rains, became an unforgiving cloak of dryness. Day after day, John watched the horizon in search of clouds that never came. His silent prayers echoed into the void of a sky that seemed to have forgotten those lands. The earth, once fertile and moist, transformed into an arid expanse of deep cracks, open scars on the body of the land that had nurtured so many dreams. The fields, once John's pride, now displayed only the withered skeletons of plants that couldn't withstand the drought. In his eyes, each dying plant took a piece of his soul with it. The silence of the dying vegetation was deafening to those who could hear the language of the earth. It's just a phase, John tried to convince himself in the first few weeks. But as months dragged on and the situation only worsened, the cruel truth became undeniable. His life was crumbling like a sandcastle under an unrelenting wave. Each morning became a battle against despair. Each night a struggle against the dark thoughts that haunted him in the darkness. The barn, once packed to the rafters, now echoed empty. The sacks of grain, carefully stored for hard times, were quickly diminishing. John rationed what he could, but knew it wouldn't be enough to get through the ordeal. Each meal became smaller, each portion more scarce, while the future narrowed before his eyes like a tunnel with no light at the end. At home, the weight of the situation made the air feel denser. Mary, his wife, a woman forged in the resilience only country women know, remained strong like an oak in the face of the storm. In her simple gestures, a silent hug, a look of understanding, a shared prayer, she offered John the only comfort he knew in those dark days. Her hands, so skilled at turning little into much, now performed daily miracles so the family wouldn't feel the full extent of the misery surrounding them. "It will pass, my dear," she said with a conviction that came from the depths of her soul. The land never abandons those who treat it with respect. But even Mary's love couldn't hide the reality settling in their home. The couple's 3 children, once radiant in their childhood innocence, now carried in their eyes a premature understanding of life's harshness. Their play became more subdued, their smiles rarer, their voices quieter, as if instinctively knowing they had to conserve even the energy of their joys. The eldest, only 12 years old, already bore the small weight of adult responsibilities, helping his father seek daily solutions. The middle child, always a dreamer, now dreamed of hot meals and full bellies. And the youngest, a girl with big, curious eyes, asked fewer and fewer questions, as if she had learned that some questions have no easy answers. On the longest nights, when everyone was asleep, John remained awake, staring at the ceiling of his modest home. The silence amplified his thoughts, and every creak of the old wood seemed to echo his worries. "Where did I go wrong?" he repeatedly asked himself. "Was I arrogant in my prosperity? Did I forget to thank for the blessings received?" Guilt gnawed at him from within like an invisible worm, consuming what little self-confidence he had left. He tried everything: old methods of moisture conservation, techniques learned from the elders, even special seeds that promised to withstand the drought. Nothing worked. With each new failed attempt, his hope dwindled, like the last drop of water evaporating under the merciless sun. Neighbors, once so present in harvest celebrations, now avoided his gaze when passing by. Some, facing similar hardships, couldn't find the strength to offer help. Others, more fortunate, perhaps feared that bad luck was contagious. Solidarity, like rain clouds, seemed to have abandoned those parts of the land. One particularly difficult afternoon, after yet another futile attempt to find life in his crops, John felt the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. He returned home empty-handed once more, having nothing to offer the family that depended on him. The setting sun cast long shadows along the path, like accusing fingers pointing to his failure. It was then that something inside him broke, the last barrier holding back all his despair. He couldn't face his children's hopeful eyes again, nor Mary's brave smile, which hid her own hunger so the children could eat a little more. He veered off the path home and headed to the center of his lands, now a cemetery of shattered dreams. Each step sank into the dry earth, raising dust that clung to his skin like a constant reminder of what he had lost. Arriving at the spot where in better times he used to stand admiring the green vastness of his fields, John felt his legs give out. He fell to his knees, like a tree finally overcome by the storm. Dust rose in a small cloud around him, the only cloud his fields had known in those times. Tears held back for so long by a masculine pride that now made no sense, finally found their way, creating dark streaks on his dusty face. "Why?" he shouted to the impassive sky. "What did I do to deserve such punishment? I worked honestly every day of my life. I never denied help to those in need. I never wasted the blessings I received. Why am I abandoned like this now?" His cry echoed through the empty field, answered only by the wind that seemed to mock his pain. With his hands raised to the sky, like a castaway clinging to any hope of salvation, John poured all his anguish into a desperate prayer from the depths of his soul. "I'm not asking for riches or abundance. I'm not asking for myself, but I can't bear to see the suffering in the eyes of those I love. Give me strength to continue, or a sign, just a sign that we are not forgotten." Exhausted by the released despair, John remained there, kneeling with his head bowed, like a statue, erected to human defeat. Time seemed suspended in that moment of total surrender, where there was no longer room for pride or pretension. It was then that a voice, soft as the murmur of a brook but clear as the ringing of a bell, broke the silence. "True defeat, my son, is not in falling to your knees, but in refusing to rise again." John lifted his face, his tears drying quickly in the afternoon heat. There, standing before him as if sprouted from the dry earth, was a man who seemed to carry the weight of centuries on his shoulders. His long, wavy white beard swayed gently with the breeze. His eyes, deep as old wells, shone with wisdom that transcended time. It was old Henry, known in the region as the Mountain Sage. Few saw him, even fewer spoke to him. He lived isolated in the distant hills, rarely appearing in the villages, always at the most unexpected moments. Some said he had the gift of foreseeing the future, others that he could speak with the land and understand its secrets. Many considered him just an eccentric old man with beautiful words, but all respected his presence. "Henry," John whispered, as if fearing that speaking louder might make the old man disappear like a mirage. "What are you doing here so far from your home?" The old man smiled, revealing surprisingly white and perfect teeth for someone his age. "Distance is just a concept for the feet, not for the heart. I am where I need to be when I need to be." He sat on the ground beside John, seemingly indifferent to the dust staining his simple but impeccably clean garments. With a gesture that seemed part of an ancient ritual, he took a handful of dry earth and let it slowly slip through his fingers. "Life is made of cycles, John, like this land beneath our feet. It knew abundance, now it knows scarcity. It seems dead, doesn't it? But within every grain you see, the possibility of rebirth sleeps." John felt a spark of irritation ignite in his chest. Beautiful words wouldn't feed his children. "With all due respect, Henry, I don't need riddles or philosophies. I need rain. I need harvests. I need a miracle that won't come." The old man didn't seem offended. On the contrary, his smile widened, as if John had said exactly what he expected to hear. "Miracles rarely come like thunder or lightning, my friend. They come disguised as small possibilities, so discreet they go unnoticed by those who only seek grand manifestations." With a fluid movement that defied his apparent old age, the old man stood and took a few steps, carefully observing the desolate field around him. "Tell me, John, what do you see when you look at your land now?" The question seemed cruel to John, who responded with bitterness in his voice. "I see death. I see failure. I see everything I built crumbling before my eyes." Henry shook his head slowly. "That's what your eyes show, but if you look with your heart, what do you see?" John closed his eyes, more to hold back the tears threatening to return than to heed the old man's request. But as he did, images began to surface in his mind, memories of better times when those same lands pulsed with life. He remembered the feeling of the first buds emerging after planting, the smell of damp earth after the rain, the shared joy in the harvests. I see what once was, and what could be again." Henry nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. The past shows us what is possible. The present is just a moment between what was and what will be." Leaning forward, the old man reached into his garments and pulled out a small leather pouch, carefully tied. He handed it to John with a reverence that seemed disproportionate for such a simple object. "Inside this pouch are very special seeds, guarded by generations in my family. They do not fear the drought, for their roots seek water in depths where others cannot reach. There aren't many, but enough for a new beginning." John felt the weight of the pouch in his hands. It was surprisingly light for something carrying such a promise. Hope, a long-absent visitor, began to timidly awaken in his heart. But soon realism returned, like a dark cloud over a sunny day. "Even with special seeds, how can I plant them without water? How can I expect them to grow in this land that seems cursed?" Henry placed a hand on John's shoulder, and a comforting warmth spread through the farmer's body, as if that touch channeled an ancient and powerful force. "There is water where your eyes do not see. And as for the curse, well, curses are often just blessings in disguise, waiting for us to learn the lesson they need to teach us." The old man paused, his eyes fixed on something distant that only he seemed to see. "But these seeds require more than just soil and water to flourish. They feed on something more powerful." "What?" John asked, now genuinely curious. "Generosity," the old man replied simply. "Half of these seeds must be planted in your lands. The other half must be given to those who suffer as much as you, or more." John felt a lump form in his throat. Giving half of that newly discovered hope seemed an almost impossible trial. "But there are so few, they'll barely be enough to start my own recovery." The old man smiled with understanding, but there was firmness in his voice as he answered, "It is precisely when we have little that generosity becomes most powerful. Anyone can share in abundance. It requires little sacrifice, but sharing in scarcity, that is a true act of faith." Before John could protest again, the old man raised his hand in a gentle but definitive gesture. "Trust the process, my friend. The universe's mathematics rarely follow the rules we know. Sometimes half can become much more than the whole." With these enigmatic words, the old man began to walk away, his footsteps silent on the dry earth, as if he didn't want to disturb the sleep of the slumbering nature. "Wait," John called, rising hastily. "How will I know what to do? When should I plant? How do I care for these special seeds?" Henry stopped and turned only partially, his profile cut against the setting sun like a figure from legend. "Your heart knows all the answers, John. It always has. Only the cloud of fear has obscured that wisdom. Cast away the fear and the path will reveal itself." And with that he continued on his way, his figure growing smaller in the distance, until he seemed to merge with the flaming horizon of the twilight. John stood still for a long time, the small pouch of seeds clenched in his hand like a precious talisman. Part of him wanted to believe the old man's words, to cling to the hope they offered. Another part, calloused by recent disappointments, feared that it was all nothing but illusions, or worse, a cruel trick of fate. Upon returning home, he found Mary waiting for him at the door, her face marked by worry over his long absence. Upon seeing him, her eyes briefly lit up, but soon noticed the confusion etched on her husband's features. "What happened?" she asked, gently guiding him inside the humble house where the children were already asleep, exhausted after another day of deprivation. In a low voice, so as not to wake the little ones, John recounted his moment of despair, the encounter with old Henry, and the mysterious gift of the seeds. As he spoke, he realized how improbable everything sounded, almost like a delirium born from his tormented mind. To his surprise, Mary showed no skepticism. Her eyes, always faithful repositories of her intuitive wisdom, shone with renewed vigor. "Henry, the mountain sage," she murmured almost to herself. "My grandmother used to talk about him. She said he only appears to those who are ready for a great transformation." Gently, she opened the small pouch John was still holding tightly. Inside, the seeds glimmered with an almost supernatural glow, like tiny stars fallen from the sky. Neither John nor Mary had ever seen seeds like those, golden like the rising sun, with small silver veins that seemed to pulse with life. "They're beautiful," Mary whispered, "and I feel there's truth in the old man's words. We should share them." John felt a tightening in his chest. "But Mary, what if it's our only chance? How can we risk half of it?" Mary took her husband's calloused hands in hers, her touch as gentle as a summer breeze. "My love, what do we have to lose? If these seeds are truly special, then they must be shared. If they're not, well, keeping them all to ourselves won't change that." The next morning, as dawn tinted the sky with its hopeful colors, John carefully divided the seeds into 2 equal portions. With one portion in his pocket, he headed to the central part of his lands, where even in the worst moments of the drought, the earth seemed to retain a little more of its vital essence. Kneeling again in that soil, this time not in despair, but in a sort of reverence, John began the meticulous work of planting each golden seed. For each one, he dug a small hole with his fingers, gently placed it down as one would tuck a child into bed, and covered it with earth, pressing lightly to secure contact. There was no water to irrigate the newly planted seeds, so John did something he hadn't done since childhood. He collected the morning dew, the only available moisture, in a small bowl. Drop by drop, patiently, he offered that precious water to each mound where a seed lay sleeping. Upon finishing, he felt a strange sense of peace. There was something deeply right about that act of faith, as if each planted seed was also a seed of hope in his own heart. With the second half of the seeds, John did something that even surprised himself. Instead of seeking out the nearest neighbors or longtime friends, he went to the poorest part of the village, where those who had always had less lived, even in times of abundance. He knocked door to door, offering some golden seeds to each family, explaining what he knew about them, that they were special, drought-resistant, a gift from the old mountain sage. Some received the gift with tearful gratitude, others with distrust, some with genuine perplexity. But John insisted to everyone that they plant the seeds with faith and share any future harvest with other needy ones. On his journey through the village, John rediscovered something that misery had obscured: the power of human connection. Nay, every exchanged glance, every shaken hand, every shared story, he felt small sparks of hope igniting. He realized that, even unknowingly, he had isolated himself in his suffering, forgetting that shared pain becomes lighter, just as shared joy becomes more intense. The following days brought a subtle yet noticeable change to John's spirit. Although nothing had changed in his material situation, the land remained dry, the barn empty, the meals scarce. Something had transformed within him. The paralyzing hopelessness gave way to a silent expectation, like the vibrant stillness that precedes dawn. Every day he visited the small field where he had planted the golden seeds. There were no visible signs of life emerging from the dry earth, but John spoke to the seeds nonetheless, telling them about his day, his children, his dreams. Sometimes Mary accompanied him on these visits, bringing a little water saved from household chores to offer to the thirsty earth. In the village, something unexpected began to happen. Inspired by John's gesture, a man who, even in his own need, had thought of others, the residents began to practice small acts of generosity among themselves. A family that managed to fish a little extra shared with their neighbors. Another, still with some chickens laying eggs, shared their small bounty. Tools were lent, knowledge exchanged, work shared. The village, which was gradually becoming a place of distrust and isolation, rediscovered the power of community. Small gatherings began to occur at dusk, where the elders told stories of past droughts and hardships overcome, keeping alive the hope that this too would pass. One morning, about 2 weeks after planting the seeds, John woke before sunrise, driven by an inexplicable urgency. Without waking Mary or the children, he hurried to the small field where he had placed his hope. What he saw upon arriving there made his heart stop for a moment. In the twilight before dawn, small points of light seemed to sprout from the earth, as if stars had fallen from the sky and nestled into the soil. Approaching with hesitant steps, John realized they were small shoots, but not ordinary shoots. These emitted a gentle golden glow, pulsating softly as if they were breathing. Falling to his knees, this time in reverence and gratitude, John touched one of the shoots with the tip of his fingers. A sensation of warmth and vitality coursed through his body, as if that small plant channeled the very essence of life. He then stood up, running as he hadn't since childhood, back to the village. He knocked on the door of every house where he had given seeds, sharing the miraculous news. Everywhere, the same phenomenon was occurring. Luminous shoots emerging from the dry earth, defying all known laws of nature. The entire village gathered at the various spots where the golden seeds had been planted, watching in reverent admiration the spectacle of the glowing shoots. Children laughed and danced around them. Elders cried silently, remembering miracles from times past, told by their ancestors. It was then, in that moment of communal awe and wonder, that the second miracle happened. Clouds began to form in the sky, first few and scattered, then in denser and darker formations. The wind changed, bringing with it the unmistakable and long-forgotten scent of impending rain. When the first drops fell, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an explosion of joy. Adults and children ran beneath the growing rain, faces lifted to the sky, arms open in reception, tears mixing with the drops that washed away months of dust and despair. John remained still for a long moment, letting the rain wash over him completely, feeling it as a sacred blessing. He then looked to the horizon, towards the distant mountains where old Henry supposedly lived, and had a fleeting glimpse of a solitary figure watching the village. But when he blinked, the vision had disappeared. If it had ever been there at Liuno, the rain continued, constant and generous for 3 days and 3 nights. Long dry rivers flowed again, wells refilled, and the land eagerly absorbed the water, like a lost traveler in the desert finally finding an oasis. When the sky finally cleared, an unbelievable transformation had occurred. John's lands and the small fields where the other golden seeds had been planted were covered with plants like none had ever seen, tall and vigorous, with emerald green leaves interlaced with golden veins, and what seemed to be the beginnings of glistening fruits. In the weeks that followed, these plants grew at supernatural speed, producing abundant fruits that, when harvested, proved more nutritious and flavorful than anything the village had ever known. More surprisingly, each fruit contained new golden seeds, multiplying the initial blessing. Hunger quickly became a distant memory. The first harvest was celebrated with a grand festival, where the entire village gathered to thank for the miraculous transformation of their fate. John, now seen as a man blessed by his faith and generosity, was invited to speak. Standing before his neighbors and friends, many of whom had doubted him in the darkest moments, John felt a deep humility. "It wasn't me who brought this miracle," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It was the generosity that each of us found within ourselves, even when it seemed there was nothing to offer. It was the faith we kept alive, even when everything seemed lost." He then looked at his family, Mary, whose eyes shone with love and pride, and his children, healthy and radiant once more. "I learned that the true harvest isn't just what we take from the land, but what we cultivate in our hearts, and that sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what truly matters." The festival continued into the night, with music, dance, and the generous sharing of the miraculous fruits. Stories were told about old Henry, some ancestral, others newly created, all weaving the legend of the mountain sage who appeared in moments of greatest need, bringing not immediate solutions but seeds of transformation. As the seasons passed, prosperity returned to the village, but something fundamental had changed. The experience of extreme scarcity followed by the miracle of abundance had taught lessons that would not be forgotten. Mutual support systems were formalized, community reserves established, knowledge openly shared. The golden seeds, now multiplied many times over, were sent to other villages facing similar hardships, always accompanied by John's story and the mountain sage's teaching that the true magic of the seeds lay not in their supernatural properties, but in the act of sharing them generously, especially in times of scarcity.